When you talk about responsive design, how many, no, we'll talk about environmental design. How many responsive design people do we have? Okay. And how many have coded up responsive design? Okay. You guys, did you choose it for, like, why did you choose responsive design?
Well, there's nothing worse than designing a site that doesn't function on other devices. So it's something that's became really important to me as a consumer shopping, noticing that things were getting cut off, things weren't working, and I love it.
Were you, did you have a mobile site before that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about anyone else? Why did you choose it?
I wanted my site to work on this.
On that?
Yeah. Turns out it does with responsive design.
Awesome. Does it have like a rendering engine in the browser?
It's WebKit,
Oh, okay.
but a very old version of it.
Right on. That's cool.
So the JavaScript doesn't work with CSS.
Good. So progressive enhancement. Excellent. So environmental design is not a new thing. It's been around for a very long time. Ever since ancient Greece, when the Greeks were building houses that worked on solar heat, all the way back then. It got formalized in the 40s when environmental design was used to build policies and architecture and things. When you're taking environmental factors into account, you're not just building in a bubble. And we can take this over to the web. First things, I'm Tim. I work at Fresh Tilled Soil. We do user experience and user interface design. We're a consultancy out of Waltham. We work with a lot of different clients, GE, TED, Microsoft, whatever. Big clients, small clients, doesn't matter. The focus of the agency is user experience. And I think we're very good at it. And one day when we were innovating outside of the box, Fresh Tilled Soil, that was a joke. Okay, outside the box. Could lighten it up a little. It's okay. We were thinking about responsive design and some of the problems we're having, and how we can kind of push the experience a little bit further. And I came across this concept of environmental design, and I started crafting this presentation around it and building a JavaScript library, and it turned into this really cool thing about taking where responsive design falls short and filling in the gaps and making a more holistic experience in the browser. So what we're going to go over is where we came from the mobile website to responsive design, why we did that, and a little journey from point A to point B. Then, this is really small, where we are right now, a kind of a snapshot of what we're doing with responsive design and the problems that it's causing, not causing, but the problems it's bringing up. And then talk about environmental design step and some of the APIs that we can use to make this happen. And then how we can get there, what we need to take it a little bit further. And the goals, by the end, you guys should totally understand why we chose responsive design, why we didn't go native or something else. Why it's only the first step in creating this user experience. And know the difference between dynamic and static design conditions when we talk about it. And where did we come from? We came from progressive enhancement way back in, I don't know when it came out, early 2000s maybe late 1990s. And we started building our sites in this HTML, CSS.
Tim, I don't understand. 1990s and we've decided building.
That's never happened. That's poor environmental design. So we were building these sites with progressive enhancement. We were doing the HTML for the structure and then putting on the CSS for presentation, and then on top of that, the JavaScript for the behavior. And everyone was going along super happy, and then the iPhone came out and ruined everybody's lives. We started to have this this awful debate over native apps versus mobile web, and everybody wanted an iPhone app. I was working at University of Southern California when the iPhone came out, and you know, in university space, everyone wants like coolest thing, and I think it's still going on. Or you know, everybody wants iPhone apps, or everybody wants mobile web, and no one really pays attention to the content or their goals or anything. You just jump into this thing, and we had to have conversation after conversation of, you don't actually need an iPhone app. It's kind of restricting. You're just reading content. This is like, the university's homepage should not be in an iPhone app. That's stupid. And we had these conversations over and over again. And the response to it was the mobile web. We came up with this split. Like, okay, you want an iPhone app, you shouldn't have one, but we can push you over to here so you can get sort of a mobile experience. And that was very telling, for me at least, going through that process of pulling people over to mobile web to kind of let them know that you don't need to do this thing. But we ran into a lot of problems. We had some problems with native. I didn't experience any native problems because I don't really live in that world. But on the mobile web side, we found, working at a university, we found that doing mobile websites really wasn't scalable. Not so much to traffic, but so at USC, we'll have one website, and that website had a companion mobile site. And everybody wants a mobile site. So you have desktop sites, like 10 desktop sites, 10 mobile sites, 20 desktop sites, 20 mobile sites. And it just blows up to this unmanageable thing. And you know, we get these weird support calls because there's a lot of overhead doing mobile websites and desktop websites. There's, you know, you guys have seen the link in the footer to view full site or view desktop site. There's a lot of overhead that goes into that link working properly. You need if you're doing Apache redirects or cookie detection or whatever you're doing, there's a lot of overhead. And what it came down to is we needed to get this massive string evaluated with PHP, and it basically looks for iPhone, Android, whatever, the BlackBerry, Palm Pre, all these specific devices, and if it detects them, it kicks you over to the mobile site. Well, we had to maintain that list, and for the little phone that wasn't an iPhone, wasn't an Android, but it was still mobile, but we wanted to kick it over to the mobile site so we would get a more targeted experience. We had to manage that list, and the breaking point for me came, I forget the year, maybe 2007, 6, when we were getting a bunch of support calls that the USC homepage didn't work in Opera. Someone would come to the site in Opera and they would get kicked over to the mobile site, and then they would try to switch back and it would just kick them back over. It just kept happening. We couldn't figure out why. So we opened up the detection script, and what had happened was Opera, the rendering engine is Presto, and we were detecting for the Palm Pre. So it was looking for the string PRE, and it was seeing it in Presto, and then pushing it over to the mobile site because it thought it was a Palm Pre. So we had some flaws like that in the detection script, and I was just like, there has to be a different way. And luckily responsive design came along, but you know, we made these discoveries that we're always chasing the native experience for some reason, and we don't deal in that controlled environment like this. This is a very, very controlled environment. You know that when you make a native app, you know what capabilities it has, you know you can access the device. We work in the browser. It's a really strange and chaotic environment. And we came to this conclusion that the browsers are going to be behind the devices. Maybe not the individual browsers, but browsers as a whole. When you think about, if you're still supporting IE7 versus Chrome Canary, the whole spectrum is behind. But that's okay, because we can look at what they're doing in native and see what they're doing wrong and what they're doing right, interface, user experience decisions that they make that we can pull over to the web. We don't have to rip them off, but we can be aware. And we came to these realizations that the only way to succeed is to not worry about what anyone else is doing. And we know what they're doing. We know what they're doing in native, and we're kind of at a point where we're doing our own thing. We're building sites responsibly. Now, they're not doing that on native. We're starting to get access to the device. We're getting some really cool stuff, which I'll get into a little bit later, that is on the device, but we don't need everything they do on the device. We just want these small set of things, and we can look at how they made the APIs, and we can build them correctly, because version 2 is always better than version 1. Even version 1 of the iPhone was not as good as version 2. Everything gets progressively better. We also came to the conclusion that this is not the web. This is a phone, this is a device. What we found out was that this is the web. A whole slew of devices. There's tablets, there's this little guy here. I didn't forget. Tablets in different directions. There's the Kindle, I think that's a Kindle, and the big cinema display. But not only just that, there's also, maybe not the Game Boy, but this is also, it's just things that can run browsers. One of the most popular browsers in cars is Opera. A lot of the nav systems are built in that. So we have all these different places where the web exists, and it's not just this. So to worry about what people are doing here doesn't really serve us any. There's no good for us. So once we accepted this and this, along came responsive design. I do love responsive design. I think it's great. I've been doing front-end dev for, 8-9 years now. Wow, that's a lot. I'm really old. I'm like I'm in my 60s. I know it's eating a lot of pizza. But I've been doing front-end dev for a while. So it's not a complicated thing. We've been doing flexible layouts for a really long time, and really the difference is the media query. So we combine a flexible layout with a media query, and we have responsive design, for the most part. I mean, it's more complex than that, but at its core, that's all it is. I really like it. It sticks to progressive enhancement. So when we were doing that switch over to the mobile site, we have our 3 layers of progressive enhancement. We have our structure, which is usually HTML, and presentation, CSS, and then the JavaScript. And what we were doing with the mobile stuff is saying that we need a new design for this site, and we're going to go in at the structure layer. But the design doesn't happen at the structure layer. The design happens at the presentation layer. So what this does is allows your structure to stay the same, but on the presentation layer where it should be is where you change the presentation. And that's what we get when we change the design with CSS and use media queries. Like, we don't care that it's a phone, we care that it has a small screen. And we don't care that it's a tablet, we care that it has a medium-sized screen or a large screen. That's all we care about, because we're just changing the design. It's a lot of the times the functionality isn't very different. You still have menus that open. The only real difference would be touch capabilities. But you can have a desktop that's very small. Desktop screen is very small with no touch capabilities. So there's a lot of combinations that this model allows for, where the mobile site is way more direct and not pigeonholed, but less flexible, I guess. So where are we right now? This usually gets a bigger response. He's adorable. Generally speaking, we can, for the most part, agree of this general structure of a web environment. You have your API or data source, whether it's a database or API or whatever, and it can spit out, maybe you're not doing all 3 of these, but it can spit out an iOS or a BlackBerry app, an Android app, and then the web app. And this is like the cool stuff that you get from the markets and the stores, and then all the crap gets dumped over here. And we deal in the crap, but we're making it awesome. So when you zoom into the web, it's still split into mobile and responsive. But, you know, we're starting to lean more towards this way. That's not saying that there aren't cases where mobile websites are necessary. If you're doing something that's truly mobile, by all means, mobile website. But what we're seeing with this is actually something like this, where we're starting with mobile, and then, you know, this is kind of the mobile first aspect of it, where we focus on the content. We get clients to focus on content and what's really important, and we build up their mobile designs or experience first, and then it turns out to be a responsive design. So it's all kind of working together. Where I think responsive design is falling short a little is in applications. Has anyone built a responsive application or just websites?
Trying to.
It's hard, right? It's difficult. There's a lot more architecture involved in a responsive application. So a lot of people would just jump straight over here if they're doing an actual, like an email application or something. Oh yeah, they're very difficult. It's difficult from a design standpoint because there's more stuff, and it's difficult from an architecture standpoint because you probably be dealing with a lot of JavaScript files maybe, and it's you know, from a resources standpoint, there's a lot going on in an app, and you know, when you build it for desktop or something, it can get very heavy very quickly, use a lot of JavaScript files, and when you bring it up on something with constrained bandwidth, it's difficult. It's hard to manage the assets. So there are a lot of problems that responsive design addressed. I love them. You don't have that debate over should we do a mobile site, should we have two sites, should we have one site. You have one site now. And you look at this, you look at an application and you say, is this mobile? Like, if I'm making a mobile site, what makes this mobile? And if it's nothing, then you don't do it, you don't make a mobile site. If you're just changing design, there's no point in breaking off that structure there. We have one code base now. You can make it with one HTML, one CSS, and one JavaScript file. You can do that. We don't have to manage all those assets. There's no removing features. If you have something that's important here, it's important there too, and vice versa. So there's, people have started treating responsive design, and when you get down to the small screen, they treat it like mobile, but it's not mobile, it's responsive. So a lot of times you see display none often, people removing features from the responsive design when it gets down to the small screen, which is generally a mistake because that switching mechanism that we're talking about when you have to go from desktop to mobile, the only reason you need that is because there's something on that mobile site that's not there that exists on the desktop one, and when people switch, it's to get that feature. So that's the only reason you need to switch. People don't care about your design, I'm sorry. But they want the features, and if the features are there, then you need to switch. With this, if you don't take features away, you don't need to switch. So there's no overhead of that mechanism, which is really nice. And it gets people to focus on what's important if you're going mobile first. They'll say, people are less inclined to say, we have white space, let's put something in there. If you start with a small screen design, when screen real estate is at a premium, they're less likely to just throw garbage onto the site that's not important. It makes them really prioritize things in their mind. And I find that really flexible. We're optimizing for flexibility in widths, not device sizes. Media queries will let you get the device size, but generally in responsive design, we're not doing that. We're doing a window with the browser with, which I think is much more helpful and flexible. And we're not creating the breakpoints anymore at 480 and 320, which is this. We're not doing that anymore. Some of it's out of frustration, I think. I think everyone's done it. When I first started out, I did it. It's just a thing that you do. But as the iPhone changed and more Android devices came out, we realized that targeting iPhone portrait is just as bad as targeting mobile only. It's even worse, actually, because you're not just all mobile, you're just this very specific thing. So we're kind of gradually getting better at this and making more natural breakpoints based on the content instead of the device. And I think we're definitely moving in the right direction there. There are also a lot of problems that responsive design exposed. And, damn it. That was my big joke. Damn it. That switched, didn't it? Crap.
Didn't say it, no.
So,
We'll do the joke backwards. Ask us to take that picture and make up a joke that goes
stand
with
like
it.
this. We'll do it backwards. So, there are a lot of problems that responsive design exposed, and this is where I feel problem solvers really love to be. There's something that's really great responsive design, and everyone's latching onto it, and you get into it and you use it, and then you find problems with it, and then you try and solve the problems. And I really like doing this. Responsive design is not the holy grail for mobile. It's a tool in our toolbox. It's not always the answer. It has problems, and we need to fix the problems. And at work, at Fresh Till Soil, not too long ago, we were having a meeting and we were talking about a responsive site, and people were bringing up breakpoints like 320 and 480, and I just kind of, we shouldn't be talking about breakpoints with this stuff, and that's how I earned my crown in the office. You would think this is positive, but this crown is actually King Buzzkill. Yeah. This hand right here is that guy right there. But yeah, you think it'd be a good thing, but everyone was getting super hyped up about taking this off the screen. Everyone was getting super hyped up about doing a responsive project, and then I just kind of step in. But I really like problem solving like that and making things streamlined and just a little bit better. And all of these problems that responsive design is having is more along the lines of asset management. And this is where it kind of relates directly to performance. Images have been a huge point of conversation in responsive design. Has anyone followed the whole images picture element conversation? Yeah. Okay. So there was the picture fill that came out, which was a JavaScript polyfill that allowed you to tie breakpoints to certain images so you could use them in a responsive design. And it's okay. It's not awesome, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So the problems with responsive design are, again, Apple ruining everyone's lives with Retina displays. So you can't just load a certain image at a certain resolution because it looks terrible on a Retina display. You need a high-res image, and the problem with the high-res image is it's huge. So if you're targeting a phone, which I understand we're not supposed to say that we're targeting phones in responsive design, but come on, we're targeting phones. And if you're saying that you're going to target a phone, it's not about the screen necessarily. The only thing that makes it mobile is carry it with me, and it has a constrained bandwidth. Sometimes, not always. Sometimes I'm on Wi-Fi. I'm on Wi-Fi right now. So if like right now, I would like the Retina images displayed on my phone because I'm on a fast connection, I have the capabilities. But if I'm walking around downtown and I don't have any Wi-Fi, maybe I have a bad signal because I have Sprint. I don't necessarily want those big images. Or if I'm lost in the woods somewhere and I'm trying to find my way out and I need Google Maps to load, I don't want super high-res, I guess Apple Maps. I was following Apple Maps to get lost in the woods. So I'm on Google Maps in the browser, and I don't have much of a connection, so I don't want super high-res images downloaded, or whatever context it's in. So that's some of the ways that you can look at the environment and how responsive design is not necessarily addressing those needs, but it was definitely exposed exposed by responsive design. Does anyone use Modernizer? Big Modernizer? Cool. We use Modernizer for feature detection a lot. What kind of features are you guys using? What are you using Modernizer for?
Was it used it for generating content once?
Okay.
What else?
Video support.
Okay. HTML5 video support.
We use it for CSS3 tasks.
Okay. So you use the body class that it spits out, or
Like no one videos.
right? Okay.
No touch.
So for anyone who hasn't used Modernizer, it's a JavaScript library, I guess we call it a library, that will do a bunch of feature detection in the current browser you're in. So you can tell if you don't have CSS gradient support, or you have touch support or something like that. And there's also, you can do feature detection like that for graceful degradation, where if you don't have a CSS gradient or a border, you can compensate for it by loading in another image or a background image or something. And so you can create the same experience across multiple browsers. Well, we can also use it for interface design. You can detect touch capabilities. And one of my favorite uses of Modernizer is detecting for touch and then using the Modernizer script loader to load in my touch interactions. So I'll keep my touch stuff in a separate file, and then if they need it, we'll go get it with an asynchronous AJAX call. So we're not forcing the browser to download all this code that it doesn't need. If I don't need touch JavaScript on a desktop browser, I just leave it alone, and we use Modernizer to detect for it. So it's sort of a way for asset management. And this is terrible. This is the picture fill element, which is what I was talking about. And you can put more than this in it, but just to illustrate what it does, the third line down, you see the media query in there? So whatever image is in that data source will load at 800 pixels when the screen is 800 pixels. And you can line up different pixels also. You can do 400 pixels, 600 pixels. You can do a retina. You can put any media query in there and make it work. And it's really nice. But what it doesn't account for is bandwidth, because there's really no correlation between the size of the screen or the size of the device and how much bandwidth you have to work with the image. And this is kind of where responsive design ends, or design, I think, ends, where you're making things look nice, and development kind of needs to take over. Because, putting an image in a page now is not just put an image in a page. It's put an image in a page and make sure it's as high performance as you can get it over this span of environmental situations. And I like to kind of say it like, development usually starts when a designer gets smacked across the face. So we're at this stage where you're trying to make the designs look nice, and you're trying to put in all these awesome features, and it's not as easy as it used to be, because we have all this stuff to deal with now. So there's a lot of asset management going on and conditional logic that we need to deal with. And this kind of brings me to where are we going? It's a dog in a suitcase, come on. And we all want to create this really high level of user experience, and we're constantly analyzing our processes to make them better. And I think it kind of brings us to the point where we need to ask, what is responsive design really targeting? It's not doing everything, it's really just a design thing. So we have possible media queries. I think there are a few more media queries, but this is kind of the focus. You have aspect ratio that we can target. So you can tell if it's a widescreen, 16 by 9, or a square, the old like a normal monitor. We can tell that. We can tell if it's narrow or what. These are all what I call static design conditions, and they don't change. Every time I go to a site on this phone, the aspect ratio is going to be the same. It's not going to change. The height and the width are not going to change. In a browser, a desktop browser, they can change, but still it's not very dynamic. Most people don't sit there and resize their browser to see all that you to use a CSS transition in your media query to make things animate around.
When you rotate the phone, does the height and width swap?
Well, it turns from the height turns to the width and the width turns to the height, but really it's still the same. Or you can change orientation. You can change the orientation, but it's one thing or another. It's very, very static conditions to design around. So it's really easy to target them. The dots per inch DPI, we have Retina now, which is 2:1, and the normal one that's just 1:1. And then there's also touch enabled, which is a Mozilla one. It's not totally out yet, but I thought this was kind of cool because you can detect for touch capabilities with CSS, and you can make maybe your areas of your links larger or something.
You mentioned a couple of times retinal display. I'm sorry, I haven't heard that term.
Oh, sorry. Retina is the beyond HD display of the iPhone and iPad 3.
Okay.
So it'll give you. I don't even know what the pixel ratio is. Is it 2:1 or 4:1? 2:1. Yeah. So you get 2 pixels for every pixel.
It's a little
Sharper.
So it's higher definition than a high definition.
Yeah.
Get 4 per one.
Or it's 2 or 4. It's higher. Okay, so it's 2x2 square for it's more. And it's higher resolution. And that's when we talk about images display. If you look at a logo on an iPad 2, it'll look perfectly crisp. But if you bring it up on an iPad 3, it might look fuzzy, just because of the resolution difference.
So you're not changing the graphics. So
Same graphic.
The display is displayed the sharper with this retinal display.
The Retina it's not a zoomed in version, but if you have a normal JPEG, it'll look fuzzy on a Retina display because it's so high resolution. So some of the ways that we're dealing with that are using vector images. And vectors are
PGs.
not quite PNGs, but they're SVGs. They're like, I don't want to say they're drawn with math. That's like, I don't know if that's geeky or not geeky. I'm not really sure. But they're like rendered in the browser rather than rendered in Photoshop. So they're super crisp and they can scale to pretty much anything. But there are some support issues in older browsers with that. I think IE 8 doesn't support SVGs. And it's 8. So there's some issues. You can use icon fonts and vector icon fonts. There's a lot of different ways that we're trying to deal with Retina. And if anyone noticed, there's been a lot of more vector designs that have come out lately, at least in the past year, and it's really to accommodate the higher resolution display, so everything will look crisp across all the devices. But so these are all the static design conditions, and this is kind of why I see responsive design is step 1 in our path towards good user experience. And I think the key is breaking free from these static environment. There's a lot of stuff we can do. We had this evolution of, we were stuck in the browser, and then we got stuck in the device, and then we kind of broke out with geolocation, where we can get your latitude and longitude, and it was going in a direction where we were starting to look around the person that was holding the phone or the laptop. But it kind of stopped. The geolocation came out, it was awesome, and then HTML5 came out with just like a flood of awesome features that really formalized a lot of stuff in the language. We had storage, like cookies, formalized in local storage, things like that. With new new APIs like web workers to speed up performance. I think we kind of got away from that environmental design, getting out of the browser, or getting out of the device rather. But, so for something like this, have you guys ever refreshed the web page that was hanging? It's it just kind of hangs and hangs. Why do you refresh it? Sometimes it works. You think the internet's going to be better or something the second time you do it. These are these environmental factors, and it does. Sometimes it comes, like it just catches the second time. Maybe your signal is different on your cell. Maybe you're in a different area. Well, there's a lot of different factors. But I lost my train of thought. So, true experiences are beyond this device. And if we get back to this model, the way I see environmental design fitting into this is more like this. So we don't care if you're over here or over there, or if you're on a native app or whatever. We want to look at these environmental factors like connection speed, battery life, ambient light, and design an interface around that. These are the things that constantly change. They can change with every page load. Like I said, my connection changes. I'm on Google here, I go to Google outside, my signal's different. I don't have Wi-Fi. Well, I don't know how long the Wi-Fi reaches. But I go down the street, and I don't have Wi-Fi anymore. So my signal's changing, but my experience hasn't. Sort of has, it's gotten worse because the pages are loading slow. And if you can catch that and maybe load in a different image, load a less resolution image in to speed up the experience, we can do that. So environmental design works on two main principles. The real world exists, and you can't control it. That's it. Once you accept that, you get to look at all these really cool things that are going on around you outside of this device. You could be sitting at home, it could be dark outside, you could be texting and driving. There's a lot of things that can change with each page load. Your battery can be drained. I don't want these huge images sucking up my battery life. Nobody wants to be lost in downtown without a phone just because Google ate up all your battery. It's been going on for a while. I remember in college, I was working in a dining hall, and we had this system in the building that would turn the heat on when it got cold outside. And that's sort of like the thing, it was a terrible system, but it was always like 90 degrees inside. But it was, like, the concept worked, but the implementation was really bad. Like, someone just, I don't know, it was always cold, turn it up to 90. But it would just, we would always complain that it was really hot, and they couldn't do anything about it because it's cold outside, so the building turns the heat on.
How do you test for all these different factors? Everything's constantly changing. How do you test? There's
a little bit of API code that's a couple slides.
Gotcha. All right.
Perfect timing. So this is where the device API and boot to Gecko come in. I say AKA the web API because the story behind this is Mozilla came up with this boot to Gecko operating system. It was a lot like the Chromebook, the Chrome OS. But what they did was they needed APIs that could access the device directly, so you could do all the development in the browser. And they started developing this web API. But what they did that Google didn't was they worked with the W3C to try and formalize the specification into the device API. I don't know why they changed the name, but they did. So, HTML5 was all these things, a lot of things that we could do before. Like I mentioned, we had local storage, a geolocation. We could always do that stuff. We just kind of got formalized. And now we're moving into some things that are in the native language. I it's just a small snapshot of the APIs. And this is actually the boot to Gecko. This would be the web API. Let's see. So here's a snapshot of the web API. There's like 20 features, but I just kind of pulled some of them out so we could talk about them. The way Firefox is implementing them, the name of the API, the desktop support, so desktop Firefox, Android Firefox, and boot to Gecko. There are plans to implement these APIs. There's an idle API, which we'll go over in a little bit. They all relate to user experience, and I think specifically network information and battery directly relate to performance. Ambient light, proximity are very, very prominent in UX. And then there's vibrate, which I think is just funny, and then idle, which can save your server a little bit. So the idle API tells you when a user is idle. And there's a few parameters that you can go through. You can see when they start being idle, you can check after a certain amount of time. You can trigger something when they come not idle, and trigger something when they go idle. Proximity API has to do with the proximity sensor in the phone. It's not necessarily NFC, but it's basically NFC from the browser. The thing is that your device does have to have a proximity sensor, and I don't believe the iPhone has a proximity sensor. So like those Samsung commercials where the people are touching phones, they're using NFC, I believe, and that would be a proximity sensor that the API could access. So you could go up to something and, with your phone from the browser and use it, which is kind of cool. And just to prove that I'm not making all this up, I do have some code, and these next slides get a little dense because it's very code heavy. But I wanted to go over them a little bit and talk about what they do. So this is the idle API, and it's a little different because if anyone like JavaScript folks, okay. So a JavaScript event normally it would be add event listener, would be the thing that you use to detect for a click or a hover, or not so, forms of it, a lot of different events. This one has a special one called add idle observer. So it's different, it's weird because it's not listening for something, it's listening for the lack of something. So you're listening for, you check in 4 seconds if the person's idle, and then there's these specific events. When they go idle, you can do something. I think I have. Yeah.
What are the criteria for idleness there?
Inactivity, you'd be, so it's per tab in Firefox. It's if you have 5 tabs open, or say 2 tabs open, Facebook and Gmail, and you're on Gmail for 4 seconds. After 4 seconds, you go idle on the Facebook tab. And then when you switch over to the Facebook tab, it becomes not idle anymore. And they're having some privacy issues with it, because if you have one tab open in incognito mode, and then the other one's not, they're still working out the specification for it, but there was something like you're not supposed to be able to tell if someone comes from incognito and goes idle or goes not idle, because they don't, they're looking at porn, they don't want you to know when they're idle. But we have, on idle, on active. So something you can do for this, I kind of equate it to the hybrid engines in cars. When you stop at a stoplight, you're idle for a little while and the engine shuts down. So you can do sort of the same thing in the browser. You could, if you're doing some polling with Ajax, you could check the body class or something. Put the body class on when the user is idle, and then check that class. And if it's there, then they're idle and stop polling the server. And you can save your server some traffic. So that's more of a user experience for your IT guys, because their servers aren't getting hit so much.
I have actually a question on the idle API. So does it work in the context of that browser, like between tabs, or does it work between like various applications? So if I have that website open, like for example Gmail, and from Facebook I jump to Gmail, and then like I went to the home screen of the phone. So does that actually get fired on 4 seconds on Facebook?
You would go idle after 4 seconds.
So it will do some event firing.
Yeah. So that's where it's kind of weird about like you're not listening for something, you're listening for the lack of something. So it's a little bit different than just listening for an event. But the event it is basically an event. It's just for some reason the syntax is different.
But like some iPhones don't like have multitasking in them, so.
It's more you interacting with the page than having it open. You can have a page open and not touch it, and you'll go idle.
Right.
Yeah. So if you close an app, or you close the
That's not-
Safari, and
That's not fired.
the event should fire. Well, if it's closed, then it's closed. But if it's just like, it's still kind of open, that thing.
Yeah, like for example, if I said like I jump back to Facebook and I hit the home button, so going back to the home screen.
Yeah.
So does this will get fired or not? Because
Yeah,
I'm not
it
sure
should.
browser now.
They're still working out the spec, but it should fire. You should say, this person's idle. Let's stop doing stuff.
Won't that part of the page hide event?
The what?
The page hide event?
Page hide event? Oh, you mean like
This page show on page hide.
on the iPhone?
It's on WebKit and Firefox browsers on mobile devices.
I'm not sure.
I think that's specific to digital mobile. No, it's
Yeah, I'm not totally sure about that. They're still working out a lot of stuff. There's I have a date on here. They're all fairly new. It's still in recommendation mode, so they're not at specification yet. There's also the vibration API, which is just the most hilarious of all the APIs. So what you can do is vibrate the device. There's no support for desktop. I don't know why. But yeah, so it takes an array or just a string of numbers where the first one is the length of the first vibration, how long you wait, and then the third one is like, and you keep going in that pattern for eternity, as far as I can tell. I mean, I gave a talk a couple years ago at Future of Web Design, and I was talking about this API, and I was looking through it, and I was like, this is really strange. There doesn't seem to be a restriction on this at all. So you could just vibrate somebody's phone constantly until they close the browser. And I read it recently, maybe a month ago, to check up, and there's still nothing in there to prevent you from just constantly vibrating a device.
You could send an arbitrary Morse code string.
Exactly. Practical use of the vibrate API. I mean, this could be the blink tag of.
I think, is this only Gecko or is it Firefox small as well?
This is in, check. Vibrate is in Android, Firefox, and Boot2Gecko.
I don't know about Android Firefox, but I know Gecko, I think it's a permission model similar to location. So the user has to give the app permission, not a.
I'm sure there's some permission model. Most of them have, even like geolocation, the little bar that comes down, you can use your, they're all these APIs basically use the same model. But yeah, but nobody reads them. I mean, it's so common now that they just click through. So, hilarity, keep that in mind.
That could be a compatibility test. How long a vibrate string can you send it before the browser crashes?
I'm definitely going to test that. This is kind of a spot where I'd like some standardization in the new specs. These are in milliseconds, and some of the other specs are in seconds, and there's just kind of this flip-flop back and forth in JavaScript between seconds and milliseconds. I don't know why it happened, but it's just kind of strange. The ambient light sensor, very cool API, and it works off of this device light event or on device light event, which is you need a light sensor in the phone, usually the camera, It could be something else, but I think they use the camera. And when the ambient light in the room changes, this will trigger, and it will return the value in, it's in lux. It's a lux value, which is just what is it? A measure of light intensity. So it's not arbitrary, but it's internationally understood as the value for light. So this is kind of cool. So this would be great for e-readers. You go into a dark room, you don't want that super bright screen, so you dim the colors in the interface a little bit. And that's just a way that your interface can react to the environmental factors. Proximity sensor. Like I said, you need a proximity sensor in the phone. And what it does is when you get close to an object that's active, the device proximity event fires, and it says, this thing is near the phone now. And then what comes back is the min distance from the phone that the object can be, the max distance. So if it's like between 1 and 6 inches away from the phone, that'll return, and then the value in between there about the distance the object is away from the phone will also return. I don't know that you can pass information back and forth, which seems like a logical next step. Like you just, I read through the specification and it's really dense, but as far as I can tell, it's just, this thing is here.
So I think the proximity sensor is actually for knowing when you put it up to your face to double or to disable the touch elements of the phone. So that, I'm not sure if that's what it is, but
I'm sure you
it
could
could be
that.
that. So then maybe you don't want to have touch enabled if you're within a certain distance.
So that makes sense.
Or you could implement a theremin.
Fair. There's, they don't recommend using this to measure distance. The official W3C specification says that yeah, you can get distance to an object with this, but don't rely on it because there's a lot of things that can interfere with the device, the proximity sensor. There's reflectiveness of the surface can mess things up, transparency, color, temperature, and the chemical composition of the actual object that you're going up to, whether maybe if it's your face or it's a rock. Those things can mess it up. So they say don't rely on it, but I don't know. I feel like you could probably rely on it. They say don't rely on anything, but you have to at some point. So yeah, you can get a rough idea. Maybe it comes back in centimeters, so it'll say this thing is 20 centimeters away. It's, so you can get a general range. But I wouldn't use it for surgery. His aorta is 2 centimeters from you. Probably don't use it in that situation. So connection and battery is where I think we can do the most, I want to say damage, but damage is not the word I'm looking for. We can affect people the most when we monitor connection and battery. And all these things that I'm talking about are the dynamic design conditions that change constantly versus the screen height and width that really don't change. So the network connection API, it's in the Navigator object in JavaScript, and basically you just access the connection object and it returns back the bandwidth in megabytes per second, and also if it's metered or not. And metered is, does Sprint limit my usage? So it'll come back true or false. So you could say I have full bandwidth, but it's metered, so maybe I won't serve all that stuff so this person doesn't have a really high cell phone bill. You can do stuff like that, which I think is really cool. It is vendor prefix right now. I don't know if it's active in Chrome, but I imagine it will be, or WebKit, sorry. But it's in Firefox.
How does it measure them?
Comes back with usually a 1 to 10 megabyte value. Like the actual, how does it test it?
Yeah.
Yeah. JavaScript API. magic, wizardry sort of stuff.
But is it nominal or it's as currently experienced?
As currently experienced. So it does
Go up and down as you walk up and down the street?
Yeah, it does change too. I don't have the event down. There is an event that listens when it changes also. So for the actual JavaScript code that you would access it with, navigator, mouse connection, bandwidth, and then you can judge the number. Based on my light research, 3 is generally pretty good bandwidth for a phone. And they have, if you get down to 0, that means you're offline. So, well, you can monitor online, offline events like this. And right now, there is an online object in Firefox and, well, Gecko and WebKit. But the implementations of them are different, and it's really terrible. So if you're doing offline storage, everyone done like a full offline app with data syncing? No? Let me tell you why. So Chrome has this online offline trigger, basically. So, and it works as you think it would work. If you disconnect from the internet, the event fires and it says this person is now offline. And every time you check it from there on, it'll be offline, 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 until you put the connection back on. And that's how, at least that's how I think it should probably work. But when you switch over to Firefox and you talk the internet on and off, it only tells you that you're online. Let's say you're online, you're online, you're online. And it's not that it's not supported or it's broken. They implement it in a completely different way. So to trigger offline in Firefox, you have to actually go to browse in offline mode. Which, has anyone ever done that? One person. I did it to test this thing. That's the only time I've ever done it. Nobody does that. So you can't data sync offline because of it. Because they're both supported and they're both look exactly the same, and short of saying this is Chrome, it works, this is Firefox, it doesn't. You really can't do any offline data syncing. So instead of addressing the actual problem of fixing that, they made 0 offline. So you can actually do offline data, or online data syncing.
What's the resolution on that scale? Does it get, how greater does it get? Is it megabits per second, or does it go down to 3.2?
It goes, as far as I know, it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, just
So is that potentially like 1G, 2G, 3G?
That's the way I read it,
Okay.
but I'm not sure. But that's the way it sounded when I was reading it.
Right.
That's a different API.
That's different again.
So one problem I've seen with this API is that it, on the desktop, it always returns infinity.
Yeah, and that's another problem, is infinity is a number.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it returns infinity because they say it's supported, but it's not. It's just, or you're on, it's connection, so if you're on Wi-Fi, it'll return infinity, I think. But Firefox Beta says they have support for it, but I downloaded Firefox Beta, it doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. But they like, it returns as if it would work, but it does, you're right, it always returns infinity. And I was actually writing a library to deal with this stuff, which this is going over that next. And when you return it and check infinity, it returns as a number, like an integer, instead of a string, which I thought was really strange. So if like I'm doing a check like this, if bandwidth is greater than or equal to 3 and it comes back infinity, it recognizes that infinity is way huger than 3. So it comes back true, instead of actually telling me that the string infinity comes back.
So I don't think it's a string infinity.
It's not, it's an integer.
Greater than everything.
Yeah, it's an integer. It's just weird that, if you look at it, it's the word infinity that you would expect it to be. It's weird. But there are people doing this right now. We're already doing bandwidth testing. And are you guys familiar with either one of these screens? So Netflix is buffering, but it's also testing your connection. And if you watch Netflix, sometimes you get really bad quality, sometimes you get really good quality. And Amazon explicitly says they're testing your connection. And funny story about Amazon, a few years ago, True Grit had just come out. And I was watching it on Amazon, and I wanted to get the HD version, because I really liked the book, and I wanted to see the movie in HD. So I got the HD one, and they did this whole testing your connection thing, and my connection wasn't great at the time. So I started watching the movie, and about half hour in, it starts getting really choppy and going through, and then it was like, oh, this kind of sucks, it's a bad experience. So, it keeps doing it for a little while over the course of maybe a half hour, and then the movie stops, and Amazon says, your connection is really poor, do you want to switch over to the standard quality? I'm like, no, I paid an extra $1, I want all my HD. So I said no, and it continued, and it kept getting choppy, and the experience was just terrible. It's like, this is a cool movie, but I can't watch it. It's just a poor experience. So I'm just waiting for this thing to come up again, and eventually, after like an hour, towards the end of the movie, it comes up again. It's like, yes, and I switched over, and I want the standard version. And then I watched the rest of the movie in standard, and it was fine. It was a better experience for me, even though it was less quality. And a couple days later, I got an email from Amazon. They refunded my whole purchase. So, pro tip: get the HD. So we're already doing this sort of thing. And then we also have the battery status API. So same way you're accessing any of these APIs, most of them are in the Navigator object. And you get back whether it's charging, whether the device is charging, true or false, how much time until it's charged, if it is charging. If it's not charged, how many seconds until it's empty. So it's like you're driving around a car and you see how many miles to empty. Sort of the same thing, but with a battery. And then the level from 0 to 1. This is in recommendation status right now, as of May, and recommendation number 8, so it's really far along. So they're very close to getting this. And there are also events that trigger when the battery changes. You can see if it's discharging or charging, and then so you can be in an interface, and while the battery's charging, and as the battery charges, the interface gets more and more complex. You fire off more AJAX calls, maybe, or you load in some higher res images, so you're not chewing the battery life. And sort of the same way you would access Navigator battery level, and then 25%. Some of the problems with these APIs, I've already found a problem with them. They're all JavaScript, so all this stuff relies on JavaScript. So if you're big into progressive enhancement and everything needs to work with JavaScript, these things are not going to work with JavaScript. So you have to build the site in a responsible way where it will degrade without JavaScript to an acceptable experience. And you have to decide what that acceptable experience is. Actually Googled weird shoes to get this. The browser is just a strange environment to work in. It's not, like I said, it's not like a native device. Everything changes, you can't rely on anything. It's really frustrating. And I have a lot of back-end developers that I know that just tell me like they don't know how I do what I do with browser testing. Because it's like a 25% of the project sometimes, just browser testing, QA and everything. And every backend developer I've talked to hates it. And that's why they don't want to go over to the front end, because it's such a weird environment. But it's okay. And once we accept that it's a weird environment and it's chaotic, we can take in all these factors and start to make a really, really memorable user experience. Or you can drive yourself crazy fighting your baseline grids in responsive design, making sure all your padding and margins are exact in Internet Explorer. But I don't like doing that. I mean, that sucks. That's not a good experience for us as the people who are building these applications. We want a good experience, just like the users want a good experience. And there's a balance in between there. So what do we need to get there? This is like the douchiest slide that I have. And it's like corporate synergy. Anyways, so we need community help. We need us using them and giving feedback to W3C, to Gecko. We just need to be involved. W3C needs to finish the specifications. They are epically slow at all times, and I don't know how it works behind the scenes, but I think we're all on the same page with it. It's pretty slow. Unless someone disagrees and thinks W3C is super fast, we should slow down. Nobody. Okay. So we need a lot of help from that stuff, and we also need some libraries. The libraries to make this stuff easier to use, and in the library building fallbacks. Like we use jQuery. A lot of people use jQuery. Some people don't know what's behind the scenes of it. But it takes a lot of the cross-browser and support issues off the table when you use a library like that. So I built a library like that. It's called Manage Library. I don't know why, but it's on GitHub. You can fork it, critique it, change it, do whatever you'd like. And really what I was trying to do was I took these three main things to deal with specifically images, but really any sort of asset. So you can manage the connection, battery, and the pixel ratio. And the example I have up on GitHub is using picture fill as a fallback. So you would do these tests, and if nothing is supported, then you can fall back to the picture fill. But I think at a very base level, picture fill is good, but it doesn't account these things. Well, it could count this, but it doesn't count those. So what this allows us to do is say whether the connection and the battery are good. If it is, load in maybe a large image and also based on the screen density. And then you can also check pixel ratio for those high-res Retina images and load in that, but only in certain situations. You don't always want, just because it's high resolution, I don't always want that image. If it's a bad battery and a bad connection, just give me a normal image. I don't need. So you can set up these conditionals, and you can define what good and bad mean also. There you go. So we need libraries, probably a better one than I did. We need help from the W3C. And once we start using these things, we also need help from ourselves, and we need to turn on our moral compasses a little bit, because there's a lot of information that we can pull from these APIs. There's a contacts API, and you could go into somebody's contacts or go into their call log, see who they're calling. You could go to their Facebook account, see who their spouse is, see that they're calling somebody else a lot, and ask them if they're having an affair. You can see that they're calling a psychiatrist a lot and feed them pharmaceutical ads. They're crazy. We just we need to turn on our moral compass a little bit and say, maybe we shouldn't be doing some of this stuff. But it really all comes down to, don't be creepy about these APIs. She's so creepy. But there's so many things we can do, and we just need to hold ourselves back a little bit and keep in mind, that we keep our focus on the user experience. We keep focused on the user and creating a really memorable and elite experience. We can stay on the right track. So I've been talking about a lot of stuff, and it's a lot of the questions at this point are like, oh, can we use this now? When can we use this? What can we do? So what's important to note about this stuff, it's like environmental design is a concept, and these APIs help illustrate it in like a cool, hey, look at what we can do coming down the line sort of a way. But there's a lot of environmental factors that we can take advantage of right now. The weather, we can get the weather. You can hit, you can use geolocation to get my location. You can hit the Yahoo Weather API, get the weather. And if I'm shopping on a site, and the site sees that I'm in Boston, it's cold, maybe it puts up some recommended winter coats. That's just something we can do outside of the normal to create a little better experience. You can do what time of day is it. If it's nighttime, I don't know, you can serve alcohol ads, I don't know. But there's a lot of things you can do right now that don't include these APIs. But you can also use these APIs and use them in a responsible way where you're doing, modernize your feature detection. And then when they start to become active, you'll be right there, making sure the experience is the best. So we went through a long journey, We talked about, we went from mobile to responsive, and then talked about responsive problems and solutions, and then some ways that we could respond to an environment with the different APIs and the Netflix and Amazon example of how they're currently using it in the weather and time and whatnot. And then how we can get some help in the future how to do it. And I hope it was good. There was some more information. I'll post these slides at some point, and I'll put the link on the message board. A lot of these, for doing more research, if you're a JavaScript person, this last one is like the weirdest sort of research that I've ever put up on a slide, because you can console log Navigator. A lot of these new APIs are in the Navigator object, and if you do a console log, you get some mass like this of garbage. But you can see towards at the top, it says battery. And you can do this right now in Firefox. You console log, and then you can see all the events on level change, on charging time, level, discharging time. You can see all the objects that you can access. And this is kind of a way to see what's coming down the line in these APIs, what they're testing out right now. This was in normal Firefox. You can see geolocation in here too. That's active. But it's also in beta version of Firefox. And you can do it in Chrome too. I don't know, they're not going to have all of them in Chrome, but you can definitely do it, and it's a way to see some of the new things coming down the line. So if you enjoyed the sound of my voice, I have a podcast at First Till Soil. I do a podcast. It's called The Dirt. It usually releases on Friday, and you can follow us on Twitter at The Dirt Show and FreshTillSoil.com/TheDirt. And you can listen to me rant and complain, and sometimes I don't even wear pants on. It's a podcast. I also wrote a book. I have one. I think I have one. So it's a beginner level JavaScript book. So if we have any beginner level JavaScript folks who want a book, there's one. It's that easy. All you have to do.
I'm bigger in JavaScript, so that will help you.
So if you want to get it, there's a coupon code on FormIT, Wright 2740. I think it's 35% off, but do the math, check it on Amazon, because I think it might be cheaper on Amazon. And honestly,
it's much cheaper.
Is it? Did you buy it?
Yes.
All right.
What will it be when they charge tax?
Oh, you just gotta load. You get like 6 or 7 books, so you get free shipping. It's probably the best thing you can do. All of these. But yeah, so if check Amazon, because honestly, I'm getting like no royalties from it, so it doesn't. You can buy it for as cheap as you can get it. Any questions, comments? I kind of put a lot of questions during.
Yeah, with all these new queries like battery and maybe the brightness of the room, how are you going to handle what people expect on their own end? Like, for example, if I have a low battery but I still really want the full experience, I don't care. I'm right next to the wall, I can just plug it in.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see developers handling that?
It's hard to get emotion like that. As developers, we kind of do conditional logic, but I guess there's really no if statement for if I'm standing next to a wall. That's a tough one. Yeah, proximity sensor next to a wall. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's tough, but I think you don't have to annihilate the experience with doing that stuff. It's just it's doing some things behind the scenes, so maybe it looks the same, but it acts differently. So maybe they'll get not the highest quality image, or maybe they're if you're doing Ajax polling, maybe they're every 30 seconds instead of every 5 seconds, sort of thing. So you just back it off a little bit. Like the Netflix or the Amazon example, that high quality experience was actually worse for me because I had a poor connection. So.
But that's actually a great point, because if you're talking about somebody, let's say it's a paid Google search ad, right? And these are new customers trying to acquire, paying money for these customers. They want to give them the best experience. Even if you're charging more on their phone bill, they're not going to know the view, right? So there's like, you end up with this huge corporation of heuristics you can do to determine what experience you give somebody. That's like, where does that end? Like, how much of your life are you going to spend, like, tailoring the experience at a very minute level for each person? It sounds like it's getting complicated, right? Like, you just go on forever.
Well, I think there's going to be patterns too, right? I mean, it's going to be something where you're going to expect certain things, and if you expect it differently from a different site than another one. So, like, AdWords is like a pretty ubiquitous thing.
Yeah.
So that might set some kind of stance. But it's probably going to take something before.
Right, yeah. It's like some picture site sucks because it's the first time visiting and they're on a terrible 3D connection. It's like, do you win there? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's the perception of the person too. If they expect something awesome, or, I mean, it could be a better experience because of the performance. It just could perform better.
Right.
So I think there's a decoupling of design and user experience that should happen more often. Where, just because you're loading in less quality imagery doesn't mean it's degrading the experience. It could actually make a better experience.
It's sort of in the same line. If you're in one tab and your application is being polite and not using bandwidth and not draining the battery because you detected you shouldn't, the guy in the next tab it could be to his advantage that you're polite. The guy who's not concerned at all about this, he's going to get a bigger fraction of the bandwidth because you're being polite.
Yeah, that's possible. I mean,
So in an attempt to improve your user's experience,
improving everybody's user experience.
The other guys.
I'm okay with that, actually. I mean, my goals aren't normally like fighting against the other guy. So if I can do something that just makes it better for the user, I'm okay with that. Even if I let this other guy suck up all my bandwidth. Personally, I mean, I'm probably disagreed with quite a bit on that one.
So, in Firefox, at least, when your tab is hidden, it reduces the resolution of the time. So if you're doing things on set timeout, so you say set timeout to 10 milliseconds, it won't actually fire up 10 milliseconds, it will fire up 200. So basically things don't happen as frequently as you think they will. So even if there's somebody else who's trying to mount damage by doing things many times a second, Firefox will do it. Sorry. And that's what we used to use as an idle timer for these API signal.
In the general case of having a limited bandwidth, one strategy for making your user experience as good as you can make it would be to, instead of letting the traffic be bursty as the user selects something, you could say, okay, I'm going to preload with whatever the most likely thing is he's going to want to do. And that way you can spread out your utilization of that narrower bandwidth by pushing things to it that maybe you're not going to need, but if it did happen to be there, it would be a big win in response.
You could do that. I would definitely, if you could test the bandwidth before that, I would do that. Like if you had plenty of resources available, then I would definitely, do as much as you can to plan for something, something later.
So I guess if you see that metered toggle being not metered, you could say, okay, I've got a narrow pipe, but I can have as much narrowness as I want. And then you could preload things.
Yeah, I think you still need to balance out some of the assets, so you're not blocking up the main thread. You can download It's around 4 to 6 things at a time in the browser, generally. And if you clog up those resource threads, it can slow down the experience. So you definitely need to manage that pretty well.
You would not want to queue up a lot of things all at once.
Right.
But maybe you would queue things fairly rapidly, depending on what else is going on.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm just thinking theoretically, and I'm not.
a lot of people use lazy loading also. Yeah, as you scroll down the page, the rest of it renders.
Sure, yeah.
So there are definitely ways.
Well, this is kind of the inverse of lazy loading.
Yeah.
You're very busily loading things that you're never going to look at, simply because the pipe is there. I don't know how well it would work.
I'm trying to understand, okay, so you get this bandwidth issue, and you're sensitive to that, so you get some smaller images. But that seems to be an asset management issue then. Now, instead of having just one graphic of a set size that you're going to use for desktop or mobile or anything else, you have to have a number of different images of the same thing. Logo, desktop, logo, mobile, logo, high res, logo, low res. And every other image and graphic that you have on your site becomes another headache. So what you talk about at the beginning of the problem with doing a web mobile versus a desktop is the asset management issue. You're introducing that with bandwidth.
Well, there's a lot of sites, like if you're running WordPress on the site, WordPress will generate all these images for you. So normal content images, you can generate 4 different sizes of image. And something like the picture fill, where you do. So the goal is that you don't want to force a giant image down the throat of somebody who can't handle it. And that would, and when you can serve up a small one, you don't have to have 5 different images. You could just make a decision to do a normal image, maybe a double resolution image, and or optimize in different ways. If you can get a content management system that generates them, that's definitely a preferred method.
So we have a travel site and users upload their travel pictures. And we do a couple of sizes. But, just 500,000 pictures there. So our server now is going to be loading three times that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I didn't really think about the server load of the extra images. So images is one example. You could do a lot of other asset management things.
Also on our site we're using a content delivery network. So our CDN costs go up also.
Well, you wouldn't be serving up. Does the CDN charge for serving them or just holding them?
Both. Okay. So you use the Amazon platform, right? So if we have a user in Europe, some might have a high-speed connection, some have a low, so we have these 3 images now, not just in our server, but in CloudFront. And Amazon's going to charge us for storage.
Right. So. Yeah, I didn't really think about that level of problem, like generally on the front end of it. But yeah, I can definitely see that being an issue.
And it's helpful to the user. I can understand that.
Yeah, you wouldn't necessarily serve up multiple images to one person.
No, like you get 3 users in Europe, right?
Yeah, so you can. Yeah.
Just a random development question. So once you're planning, when you're creating a new mobile responsive site, should we consider all these upfront, or would you go responsive first and have a site here and then add on things? Would there be any problem if you think about these later, once you have a working site?
I think it's always better to think of them up front if you can, but they're not terribly
in terms of writing your JS code or writing your CSS, because sometimes you have a deadline from business saying you will launch a site, but you are not considering all these things. But then you work with your designers and UX people, making sure adding all these different variables.
Right. So here's a pattern that just happens with web development in general. Back when I first started, we had web standards, and accessibility kind of came along. And then we said, we're going to build this site, and then we're going to put on the accessibility stuff. And then naturally, accessibility kind of leaked into the normal process. And then something like usability testing came along, and we had our thing, and then we just tacked usability testing onto the end. And now it's kind of leaking into the process, the normal flow. And then mobile came along, and then we just tacked on mobile to the end, and then it kind of leaked into the middle. And then responsive design came in, and we tacked it on. Like, we would build a site and said, let's make it responsive. You know, that's not the best way to do it, but eventually it leaked into the process, so we started building it, you know, naturally. And stuff like this will probably get tacked onto the end at first, and then over time, it'll work itself into the normal process, just based on what's happened with other things that have come along.
I'm gonna start here, Tim, and build a train, so let's thank Tim for this stuff.